Okay, so we're talking to Richard Lear, and I'm out in my garden at the moment getting some sort of just circadian rhythms recharging the mitochondria, which is really relevant because of talking to Richard Lear, who wrote an incredible paper called The Root Cause of Chronic Illness or Disease, which absolutely took me by surprise. Your work, Richard, is just phenomenal. And I know you're a researcher, but like most great people, they do something different because they're not trapped in a mold, a medical mold or something like that, where they can only follow one particular path. So you've taken all that information, created something called P Factor, and I just really wanted to talk about some of those key important points there that you may just be able to open up and postulate without any boundaries. In other words, this is my thought. There's some research to suggest that. We're looking at the P factor, and we're looking at mitochondrial dysfunction, peroxynitrite, oxidative stress, and there was another key factor that you spoke about. I can't remember off the top of my head. But I do have some really key questions which I'd love to ask you. Your work, and I saw your work on the 5G summit with Josh. I think it's De Soul, isn't it? Or is it something?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes. Josh De Soul.
Which was I've watched many a summit, and that was probably one of the most informative I think I've ever come across in my whole entire life. And I've watched through every single video on there, and I've been researching and working with lots of amazing people around the world in this particular field, and coming up with a new book or writing a new book called How Can I Heal? And your work changed everything in a nutshell. It just suddenly went, okay, so we have these chronic diseases which my students have been asking me about, and I've been trying to fathom out. Things like Lou Gehrig's disease, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, autism, diabetes, all of them non-bacterial, non-viral, non-fungal, and non-parasitical.
Yeah.
And here we are. And we're seeing, I think your figures went from 1990 to 2015, and now we're in 2019 with a rollout of 5G. We're going to see a massive increase in, I think, a lot of these P-factor driven diseases. So a couple of questions that I got for you. You mentioned in that video how you thought, or maybe you can explain, there's one particular fact that you talked about. Well, let's just start off. When we are exposed to things that cause P factor, things like genetically modified foods, Roundup, sugar, but more importantly, let's just talk about radio frequencies in non-ionizing microwave radiation. How does that actually interact with the cell? What is going on inside the cell? Well, we know that Martin Paul's work talked about the voltage gate calcium channels. But, you alluded to it, that there's this, what actually happens? We're talking about the electron change as well, aren't we? We're talking about, does peroxynitrite get released immediately? You talked about even with a plant getting cut or damaged, then peroxynitrite is released. What is the mechanism as far as you see going on?
Yeah, and I can bring up some slides too to support this. But if you think about disease and you think about the prevalence of disease today, about 90% of disease today is environmentally triggered. That's the big aha. And when I say environmentally, that's diet, lifestyle, environment. So disease today in America is really caused by us. We have the power to change it, and we are creating the chemicals, the heavy metals, the electrical energy, and pesticides, et cetera, and the sugar in our diet. All those things are the external or exogenous causes of disease. So I'm going to go from the outside in rather than the inside out for a second.
Yeah.
what happens in the body is the body actually has a complex system of receptors. So your taste buds, they're taste buds for what's, food in your mouth. We have receptors for sight, photoreceptors. And we have receptors for chemicals, chemoreceptors, and we have electromagneto receptors. We have photoreceptors that also work on electromagnetic energy. So we have energy receptors, and then we have chemical receptors. And our body, when we are our body is uniquely attuned to our environmental situation. And when the body detects environmental stress, one way the body reacts is it sends messages to the cells. So let's say, in the notion of plants, we talked about plants, heat or drought or even bacteria or viruses. Plants react, and they have a whole process where they react, and then they send a message to the cell. The message is sent with calcium, in this case. It's calcium ion. It's a neurotransmitter, basically. It's a transmitter of information. And it sends it comes to the cell, and the cell has a channel. It has a little channel that's pretty much closed. It's like a gate. It's like a little pipe in. Like, how do you get into the cell? So when the calcium comes to that gate, there's a series of things that happen, and the gate opens when you have calcium coming that direction. It says, oh, this is calcium. I'm a calcium ion channel. I'm going to open up, and I'm going to allow calcium to come in because there's a message. So the calcium is being triggered by these receptors that are in our skin and elsewhere in our body based on whatever the environmental threat is. When the calcium comes in plants, it's an influx, and that calcium influx basically creates a disequilibrium of calcium in the cell. The cell's going, oh, there's too much calcium here. We're out of balance.
And so does that mean that there's obviously an electron charge, in a higher electron charge within the cell, and outside the cell there's a potential difference? Is that correct in my thinking?
So right now I'm talking about the biochemical changes. There can be an electrical, there's also an electrical piece that I want to talk about separately.
Yeah.
Because I'm a researcher, not a scientist. So I can come up with some analysis and I can come up with some guesses, but there's somebody else out there. It could be Martin Paul. It could be somebody else out there who can actually answer that question. But right now, what I do know, and what's clear in the science is when the level of calcium rises, inside the cell, you have some changes that happen. And one of the outcomes is a release of oxygen species. So it's they call it an oxidative burst. Okay. And we're going to call them free radicals, even though they're not strictly free radicals. And so in plants, we've got environmental stressor, and then it could be heat, germs, toxins, something like that. Yeah. The plant senses danger with a receptor, alerts the cells with calcium influx. It goes into the cell. And once it crosses in through the ion channel, there's an oxidative burst. And that oxidative burst also, so that oxidative burst, I don't have it on this slide, but it actually creates two things. It creates superoxide, which is a form of oxygen. It's a free radical, and it's called hydrogen peroxide. And hydrogen peroxide is, in and of itself, is not really that toxic in the body, but it is set up to actually create some really nasty free radicals downstream. So when it's floating around, you can get other free radicals like the hydroxyl radical, which is the worst one. And I'll tell you why free radicals are bad. So free radicals are, your answer to your earlier question, free radicals and reactive oxygen species, reactive species in general, that's what's happening in the body, not just in the cells, but throughout the body. That's what's really leading to disease. Free radicals are proliferating, and they're damaging just about everything in the body, depending on which free radical we're talking about. So in the old days, we were worried about bacteria, virus, and mold. We were worried about, these are communicable diseases. These are infectious diseases. We're still worried about it. We're washing our hands like crazy. We're getting immunized. We're trying to protect ourselves from every bug in the world. But the most dangerous bug in the world are the ones we're creating in our body called free radicals, because for two reasons. One is nobody recognizes how bad these things are for our body. But if you get the mumps or the measles, or you get a cold, your body's pretty well set up to win that battle. Most of the time we win that battle and that disease is over, and then we have resistance to those bugs, those particular germs in the future often. And so it's over. It might be 2 days, 5 days, 100 days. It doesn't matter. We get out of that disease. The diseases of civilization, the 36 fast-growing diseases that I looked at, and a bunch more that are really growing out of control, do not have an end. They do not resolve. The body has not figured out how to deal with them. In fact, the body's actually increasing the impact of these diseases through an ironic sort of series of events, which is this thing in your screen right now. So what happens is, once we get this free radical production in the body, and it can be in many different free radicals, and there's many ways free radicals can get created, not just this way. We start to get damage in the body. And we can see on this screen, there's also this thing, calcium efflux. So this is what Dr. Martin Pall recognizes. He says, okay, he says there's this voltage-gated ion channel. Let's insert that between this, the calcium influx in the cell. So there's this channel, and it gets triggered by a change of voltage, which is voltage potential on the membrane around the cell, that allows that the cell, that the gate, the voltage gated gate, perceives an increase of voltage, and so these gates open. I think that's Martin Pall's saying. The gates are being opened like from electronics and the electrical charge and the voltage changed around your cells, that opens the gates. And that may be true. I expect that is true, but this particular environmental stress chain of causation does not actually need that particular thing to happen. What happens is the receptor sends calcium, the calcium goes to the cell, and the gate opens because calcium's sitting there knocking on the door. That is what the science, general science will agree, that this is what the environmental stress response is, this, not only in plants, but in humans, okay? So yes, Martin Pall may be right, and I think that there's a great case for electromagnetic fields to trigger ion channels, not just calcium, but phosphorus and sodium channels, the sodium pump, because the electrical potential is changed by the amount of electric voltage that the body is actually absorbing from its electrical environment. So that's why I didn't answer the question on charge directly. But when voltage, when there's a change, when ions come in and out, the voltage of the cell can change. And I know that within phosphorus and sodium channels, when there is a change, the cell, which is normally negative 60, I think, negative 60 millivolts, can get a 70 millivolt positive change. And so it changes radically in a very quick way the voltage level of the cell. And positive voltage is not really good for our bodies. We really operate at a negative voltage, but all this electrical energy around us is in the form of positive voltage. So I'm going to talk more about ion channels at another point, but today I want to talk about free radicals, because free radicals are the damaging thing. And so this is P factor. These are the fastest growing diseases, share these 7 biofactors. And this thing, oxidative stress at the top, that's really free radicals. And what it looks like to me is that there's a number of ways that free radicals can get triggered, but it looks like free radicals, oxidative stress in general, starts this system into activity. So we've got peroxynitrite in the middle. It is the result of oxidative stress, and it also creates oxidative stress. Oxidative stress creates inflammation, and also and inflammation also creates oxidative stress. And then, so there's a vicious cycle here between oxidative stress, chronic inflammation, and peroxynitrite. And then mitochondrial dysfunction is another place where lots of free radicals are created. So you got, it's not in this graph. I'm just hopefully my pointer is showing where I'm looking, but this mitochondrial dysfunction piece is actually creating free radicals. And when peroxynitrite gets into the mitochondria, the little factory here for energy, mitochondria factory that's creating energy for the cells, energy for thinking and running and performance and organ, integrity, anything that's going on in mitochondria, that particular cell, the energy that's being produced starts to get substituted for peroxynitrite. So peroxynitrite, when it gets in these cells, it's creating it creates this outcome, superoxide, which is oxidative stress. And then the superoxide finds some other stuff around there called nitric oxide, and then that forms more peroxynitrite. So the mitochondria becomes, instead of a factory for energy, when you have peroxynitrite around, it becomes a factory for more peroxynitrite. So the point that I'm making is oxidative stress is probably the initiator of P factor in disease. Martin Pall makes a point that peroxynitrite can be a direct outcome from electrical fields, and that may be true. But there's this oxidative stress piece is probably the initiator, mostly some peroxynitrite. But once you get into this, when you have the inflammation and you have the mitochondrial dysfunction and you have some of these other biomarkers, which are really biofactors, and this peroxynitrite suddenly becomes the accelerators. Peroxynitrite becomes a primary mover. So the initial mover, I think, is oxidative stress or free radicals. The primary mover, once you're into this really, really devastating system of interactions between these different things, you have so much damage going on that peroxynitrite kind of takes over and just, it can operate on its own. So if peroxynitrite is formed by superoxide, which is an outcome of that initial diagram we saw, and then nitric oxide, which is a good thing in your body, actually something that your body needs for vascular dilation, and it's created through exercise, and it's nitric oxide is a pretty good thing. In fact, athletes take it all the time. Problem is, if you're getting some oxidative stress and you're taking nitric oxide, you're liable to get peroxynitrite, and you may undo ultimately a lot of things you wanted to do. I'll stop there, and you can ask questions, and then I can talk more if you want.
One of the things that we do a lot of work in my work field is inflammation. So I mentioned in my email that we will work with clients with chronic inflammation, or actually inflammation that's collected around a specific area of the body. And therefore, and I'm just about to write a piece about inflammation in my book. Right. And this is what triggered one of the conversations I wanted to have, because if peroxynitrite is involved with an inflammation, then it could change the way that we approach this. So I think that's one of the key factors I wanted to talk about, and you've got some, maybe you've got some answers there, or maybe some postulations. And I bow to your knowledge on this, and just see where you're going with. Why did you notice inflammation? Because in my world, inflammation is triggered by from an energetic point of view, the abandonment isolation conflict that a client goes through. So if we get a client, say for example, like an elderly client who is taken by the children and put in a home, what we'll see is chronic inflammation literally land in their legs and their ankles. And then if we go in and we work with that client and clear out that abandonment and isolation feeling or emotion, really, or whatever you want to call it, the inflammation will disappear. So we know that works. But what is your take on this from peroxynitrite's point of view, or P factor, I think is a better way to put it? Let's see, you've got a great slide there.
Yeah, so there are really better slides than I've got in this presentation to talk about how inflammation can get triggered, right? I will say this, that when we go back to the slide on stress, environmental stress, and we, listed, well, a later slide will list some of the exogenous triggers for heavy metals, electromagnetic fields,
Yeah.
on and on, chemicals, pesticides, et cetera. What also could be listed in that is two things: brain trauma and psychological trauma. So I haven't dealt with those much, but in all the reading, I mean, I see brain trauma all over the place. I see psychological trauma all over the place as triggering the stress response. So when the body goes into stress response, you have the generation of free radicals, and as soon as you have free radicals flying around, you're going to have inflammation. So that's one vector or one pathway for inflammation. And if you can alleviate that stress, and that stress would be chronic or persistent, right? So if somebody is I'm just postulating now, but if somebody's in a crisis mode, or they're feeling there's heightened emotions around certain things where you have a trauma going on or a sustained trauma, lots of biochemical things are happening. And, certainly one of them is the production of free radicals. Now,
well, that's my work as well. That's what I've spent the last almost 30 years doing, is looking at those underlying traumas. And then how do we release that? And we've got systems for that. That's a given. It's simple to do, and we can be very thorough with that.
Yeah.
Right. That's a good answer. That's an answer that pleases me. So I'm
there's no question it's there. Now here's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
If you look at our electrical environment for a moment, our electrical environment is responsible for triggering the autonomic nervous system in many ways. The autonomic nervous system, it could trigger your breathing mechanism. It could trigger your heartbeat, your rate of your heartbeat. It could trigger skin electrical galvanic activity. It can trigger sex drive or not. It can trigger anything the autonomic nervous system is responsible for, right? And so think about a person who is slightly anxious and maybe he's gone through a trauma. And think about, and it triggers it at very low intensities. So there's a great paper on this. There's 111 studies that link autonomic dysfunction or triggering of the autonomic nervous system from electrical wireless technologies, really microwaves and what you call radio frequencies.
Is this Patch's work or?
No, this was way before that. This was this is a guy named Bergman.
You talked about Bergman, and I couldn't find that paper.
It's really hard to find. I should publish it on some website because it was the paper was lost. The paper was discovered by Dr. Magda Havas.
I've just been speaking to Dr. Magda Havas. So maybe she might be able to get me a copy too. I'd like to see that.
So Dr. Havas, what she uncovered, she met a guy named Dr. Zori Glaser.
Yeah.
And Zori Glaser did, what he did was he did a study for the Navy in the early 70s to see which microwave and radio frequencies, or to see if microwaves and radio frequencies could actually cause any biological harm. And it was a resounding yes was the answer. And
well, she has a copy of that, and I have a copy of that as well. She has that on her website, magdahavas.com.
And make sure you read the 71 paper, not the 76 paper, because the 76 paper was doctored to actually take all the power out of that paper. And I see the 75 or 76 paper floating around everywhere, and everyone thinks, it's an update, but it's not. It's actually somebody did a clever job of like reducing the potency of that paper. And I won't go into all the details, but in a number of ways.
Yeah.
But the 71 paper is accurate, and I met with Dr. Zori Glaser. I've talked to him. I don't know if he's still alive. I haven't been able to get in touch with him, but I talked to him in 2011 or 12 and talked to him about that paper and what he found. But she also, so he had 60 boxes of paper of studies that showed biological effects of microwave radiation at legal levels, at low levels. Okay. He had 60 bucks in a sort of a storage locker, he was about to get rid of them. And Dr. Magda Havas somehow got in touch with him and was able to go down and with her U-Haul and load up her U-Haul with all those papers and take them up to Canada. So
maybe I should go and see her. And she's literally a couple of hours away. And like I said,
yes,
this morning.
So she has this paper, and she has the, and so a lot of these papers aren't available, but because, we're thinking the paper that I'm talking about is 1965. But why it's so powerful, that paper, that's autonomic dysfunction, is it used empirical experiments. Almost everything it used were empirical experiments of how these microwaves would actually change our autonomic response. So an empirical experiment is like, there's nothing better if you can, and one of the experiments they actually used was they hooked an electrode to the skull of a person, and they connected it to a light fixture. And then they had the person actually move their open and close their hand, and it lit up the light bulb. And I mean, I would love to see that experiment on YouTube today, because that would get 5 million hits tomorrow, because it shows that the motor neurons in our body of moving your fist or opening and closing your hand tightly is actually creating an electrical current in their body, and it's enough voltage to actually turn on a light bulb and a lamp. And so that whole study, it's one of the most powerful studies I've ever seen, because it showed when they exposed individuals to microwave radiation, it showed their heartbeats changing dramatically, in a controlled study. It wasn't like
Magda Havas shows that, doesn't she? I mean, if you
Magda Havas does show that. But this is like an earlier study with this is before the arguments in politics around electromagnetic fields came about. So it was just an honest, naive, and very seminal experiment. But what happens is, let's go back to your patient who's traumatized, right? That traumatized patient is living in today's electrical environment. Now, they don't know that their Wi-Fi router, or some of these routers, which is powerful, is creating these frequencies, not only the frequencies that initially hit you, but these like harmonics. So the postulation of Berkman's paper, basically, he says, it's not actually the field itself. It's a component of the field that tricks your sensors in your body to think that there's a message being sent to the autonomic nervous system to turn on. So in a lot of ways, I think that you can simplify it. Electromagnetic fields are stimulating our fight or flight response. The sympathetic nervous system, right, is getting triggered, and so we're basically, you want to balance your time between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, but if with all these electrical fields around there, we're on. People we're on all the time. We're excited. We're moving. We're jazzed up. It's like we're on coffee even without coffee, and that's because these electrical fields around us are triggering all this autonomic stuff. So your patient or your individual that you would have like a panic attack, or they would be depressed, or they would have heightened feelings of, whatever trauma they went through. Well, those feelings are going to be magnified by the electrical environment around them. So you may not be able to turn them, you can't really turn that off. And now you got more free radicals being created, because all this autonomic response is triggering acetylcholine and adrenaline and everything else in your body, epinephrine, whatever, and you're getting a lot of action that you shouldn't have, because fight or flight's turned on. And when fight or flight's turned on, the outcome of that is you're going to get a lot of free radical production. And
this has been my experience over the past 5 years. I've been working with clients where even 10 years ago, we were able to clear up stuff and they were getting better very, very quickly. And then literally in the last 5 years, including in many of my students, not getting well, and then just staying in this state, including myself. And I'm just going, why is my work not working? Recently, after watching your work, I even had a client with heart arrhythmia, was booked in to have a pacemaker. And I said, please just stop the pacemaker. What I want you to do is I want you to go into your office and remove the Wi-Fi element of your Wi-Fi router. So it just becomes a router, wire everything, get rid of your cell phone and just switch it on when you absolutely need it. and then get away from any cell phone towers and shield your, do all this work before I'm even going to look at your heart fibrillation, because to be absolutely honest, I don't think you have it. I think most of this stuff is actually driven by your work, by P factor just coming in and messing around the microwave radiation.
Yeah.
One of those triggers being P factor. Yeah.
So the getting back to chronic inflammation, because chronic inflammation is a symptom. It is a biological factor. It is causing damage. It is part of, in my opinion, a larger system, let's call it P factor. But if you just look at inflammation, now Martin Pall has really good papers where he shows how free radicals can trigger NF-kappa B. And when NF-kappa B is triggered, then inflammation follows. Yeah. So then he also shows how, in the overall scheme of things, inflammation causes additional INOS, and that's it's nitric oxide synthase, and nitric oxide synthase increases the amount of nitric oxide available. And inflammation also, superoxide somehow gets, I think, okay, I'm trying to remember superoxide in this particular, but if you have more nitric oxide available and there is superoxide present, then that's going to cause peroxynitrite. And then when peroxynitrite gets going, then you start to have everything, because peroxynitrite is, we put it at the heart of it because it actually can create every single one of the other biofactors independently. So free radicals were there, maybe started some of this. Then you got into this chronic inflammatory state. And then when you got into this chronic inflammatory state, with all this NF-kappa B, you're creating all sorts of histamines and cytokines, and that's inflammation. So you could get it from a free radical itself and some sort of psychological or head trauma or non-purely environmental experience, but you could get it from other ways. Now, Ole Johansson, who is cited in the Bioinitiative report, are you familiar with Ole? Dr. Yeah. Okay. So Ole Johansson, he does a great job, and he comes up from a different angle. What he does is he does an experiment that's empirical experiment, which is a good one, where he exposes individuals to both a low electromagnetic field and a higher frequency field at the same time. So they're getting basically a modulated field. And the body doesn't like modulated fields. It likes simple continuous field, like a sine wave. Yeah. But anytime you expose the body to anything but a sine wave, it starts getting reactive. Well, where he picked it up is like, once you expose the individual to this electrical field, what he found is that the mast cells proliferate, right? Are you familiar with this study?
No, but carry on.
Yeah. So the mast cells are a sign of allergy. Mast cells are in your heart, your brain, your body, and mast cells, when they proliferate, you often get reddish in color. But mast cells are basically reacting to something in the environment that you're allergic to. So it's showing an allergy with these people, that the people that he exposed it to from the electrical fields. But that's not where the story doesn't end, because mast cells are a signal to release cytokines and histamines, which are the inflammatory substances. So your body, the innate immune system, is triggered by electrical fields. This demonstrates it perfectly. It says, okay, here's an environmental factor. We haven't talked about free radicals yet. We're just observing the innate immune system, what it's doing. And it's saying mast cells turn on, histamines and cytokines get released. Those inflammatory substances are released in the body. They're creating inflammation. They're trying to attack whatever the invader, and they can't find it, but they create inflammation wherever it's happening. And so now you're in that inflammatory state. So your immune system goes, okay, what do we do about this? This inflammation, what's happening? And that's when the adrenals click on and they start releasing cortisol rather. So cortisol is the signal to end the battle. It's the substance that gets released into your body to kill the inflammation. That's why you get cortisone shots. It's like a form of cortisol. It's like, okay, it's a natural thing. It is a nasty substance that you don't want in your body very long because it has lots of damaging effects. But it's useful, and it's very useful if you have the flu, right? When the flu is, your body reacts, it goes into inflammation, releases phagocytes or phagocytes. It's attacking, these white blood cells are attacking the disease. And all of a sudden, when it's under control, the cortisol gets released and it reduces the inflammation and tells the immune system is basically saying, battle's over, done. And so the immune system is all set up to have this little cycle. The problem with electrical fields is they're persistent and chronic. And that's why you have diseases chronic and inflammation is chronic, because it doesn't go off. It's not like the measles. We're so worried about measles, mumps, and everything else. We're giving all these immunizations, but we've got something that's even worse, and that's persistent chemical or electrical exposure, which is triggering, the innate immune system and the cellular response and everything else. So on the one hand, Ole Johansson has demonstrated how chronic inflammation gets triggered, and then cortisol gets released by the adrenals, but it's still there. So you go back through the cycle again because the electrical energy is still in your body. So now you're going to get some more mast cells. So you're going to, now we do adapt. What's this interesting? That humans do adapt. So some people can adjust to electrical activity. Others don't adjust so well. But so you're not going to get the exact same response each time. It's a modified response because of adaptation. The body understands, oh, okay, now I got to get used to this. I'm just putting it at a very high level. It's much more technical than that, I'm sure. But the chronic inflammation can be formed by electrical fields, and I think chemicals as well, and anything else. So there is an immune system response, which is a little different than this free radical response that comes from the environmental stress. Now, did Ole just miss the first step? Did your body first go, oh, I'm releasing free radical, I'm releasing calcium influx, I'm doing calcium influx, I'm creating free radicals, and the free radicals got you going into the chronic state and got the mast cells going? That could be. It could be the way it works, but it doesn't really matter. He showed a direct response on the body where it affects the immune system and in inflammation with electrical fields. And so you have that going on. And so during that process of that constant chronic inflammation, you're kicking out more INOS, and you're with superoxide floating around, you're going to get some peroxynitrite. So these chronic diseases advance the system of P factor into more prolific damage. And so you would ask sort of like what, I think you'd ask somewhere along the line, you'd ask about peroxynitrite, what are the outcomes? And there are many outcomes, but the paper I wrote on the root cause, the dramatic rise of chronic disease, that paper, I just cited 97 biological outcomes, biological disruptions from peroxynitrite.
Yeah, I saw that in the back.
And it's really like in 12 or 15 different categories. So you could say, well, maybe there's not 97. I mean, oxidative stress, nitrative stress, it's cell signaling background, issues, destroys proteins, destroys lipids, destroys DNA damage, blood-brain barrier damage, on and on and on. So it's pretty devastating. People probably want to know, like they're trying to say, wait a second, how do these free radicals, how does it work? How does peroxynitrite do all this damage? And it turns out it's, and you know this, I'm sure, but if you pass this on to your viewers or your patients or people free radicals and peroxynitrite, imagine they're Pac-Man. They just go in and gobble this stuff up, right? So the way it works, though, is like beautiful, actually. So a free radical it has an unpaired electron or more, maybe two. And what's happening is when a substance like a free radical is floating around, and I'll give the hydroxyl radical, which is HO negative or OH negative. And that guy pairs with everybody. It doesn't matter. It's like you're at a dance. Imagine you're at a dance and you've got somebody who is attracted to everybody. And as soon as it's attractive, it changes both of them into something else. So you got a guy at the dance. He's a free radical or he's peroxynitrite. He goes up to a girl, and as soon as he gets up there, they start dancing, and then they turn into pumpkins because the girl has an extra electron, or there's an electron transfer between the two. And the substance the girl was, whatever that substance was, a protein, let's say she's a protein, she now is no longer a protein. She's useless. And the free radical is gone because now it's formed into something else. And in the case of peroxynitrite, where it plays in, where this really plays out is we've got tyrosine, running around our body, and we've got tryptophan floating around our body. And tyrosine and tryptophan are precursors to dopamine and serotonin. Mm. Okay, this is where it's going to really affect your people, right?
Yeah, well, we see it already. We actually see this.
Yeah, not just your people, all of us, right? Yeah. So for your viewers who don't know, dopamine and tryptophan, dopamine and serotonin are your two key transmitters that make us human. Between them, they shape attitude, motivation, executive function, our ability to look at nuance, our ability to see outside ourselves, compassion. Can you imagine a whole society with low levels of serotonin and tryptophan? It would be irrational. It would be a society of, people fighting each other. It would be a society where there'd be lots of violence. It would be a society where people didn't respect each other and had no compassion or view, ability to look at other people's point of view. Can you think of such a society today?
Yep, I think we can.
Yeah. So when we look at what's going on in society, we can go back to the biochemical underpinnings of it. And it's because tyrosine and tryptophan, the two neurotransmitters that are supposed to be the precursors to dopamine and serotonin, these beautiful transmitters which make us human, are being damaged by none other than peroxynitrite.
And this leads me on to something that's really fascinating, which we are seeing exactly that in our clients. I also have experienced a similar type of thing inside myself, where I've had acute anxiety just walking around my local area here. As I go past certain houses, the Wi-Fi's intense. I can see it on my meter. And then I get this absolute, this horrible feeling inside. And this is you're going to talk about that system. But on that note, we actually have systems for actually relieving things like bipolar disorder. But this also then links into mood stabilizers, psychotics, and antidepressants. So we're actually seeing the medical industry only having a small arsenal to be able to deal with this, which doesn't actually work, which causes a heck of a lot more problems. And There was another factor, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but this is just, like I said, this changes everything. I'm going to let you talk because I can talk forever, and I'd rather listen to you, and I'm sure the audience would rather do that too. Over to you again.
I mean, it's great. You're giving you're providing the clinical backdrop to the reality of what's going on biologically. But to finish that story where people can see how the Pac-Man thing's working is you've got peroxynitrite, which is this ONOO thing in the middle. You've got that floating around your body. Now, when you have that floating around your body and then it comes into contact with tyrosine, that's the bad guy at the dance. And tyrosine is the beautiful girl at the dance. So when the beautiful girl, tyrosine, it's really wanting to go start up, a dopamine, production, because it combines with phenylalanine and other things. And tyrosine ultimately it is in the sort of critical path to get some dopamine, which you need dopamine. That makes you feel really good. That's why people are taking so many, narcotics, and they're taking these drugs that are, oxycontin or whatever.
Yeah.
They're trying to take these oxy drugs, these drugs that are heroin basically based, because they're trying to get dopamine in their body. They're trying to feel good, and the dopamine's not getting there because the young girl at the party is coming up against oh no, O-N-O-O, and oh no. As soon as they start to dance, guess what happens? Well, the tyrosine and oh no together create nitrotyrosine. And guess what? Then there's some, actually some water I think comes out of that. I can't remember exactly. I think water comes out of that too. So water's one good thing. And then nitrotyrosine, which is unusable in the body, you lose your tyrosine, so there's a low supply of tyrosine for dopamine. And the peroxynitrite was also basically reduced. It's no longer, that particular peroxynitrite molecule is no longer around. So that bad guy's gone, but the good girl's gone. But there's more bad guys like that at the party. They're all over the place, and they're next. They're finding a tryptophan girl. I don't know why I'm making the guy bad and the girl good. But, it's not politically correct today. We should probably balance it off. But
it's all good.
We've got these oh no's floating around. And then we've got tyrosine, tryptophan, proteins, healthy fats, DNA, everything else floating around. And this oh no goes in, and it's like a Pac-Man, but it's more like a combination. They're exchanging almost like in a very intimate way. They're exchanging electrons, and now they're turning up with two new things. But two new things that aren't really critical for your body's health. Water is important, but you're going to get water, you're going to get oxygen, you're going to get different things out of these things, but you're going to get something that's useless, and you're going to lose something that you really need. Now, I'm just leaving this on the screen. I'm not asking people to really understand what this is, but what it's meant to show is there's interaction. There's a system going. These 7 factors are operating. They're causing each other. Like MD over here in the middle is causing peroxynitrite. Peroxynitrite is causing more MD. Nitrogen stress is causing peroxynitrite. Then it's going on and creating more P factor. And you've got more of these P factor circles over on the right are just an abstraction of what you're seeing on the left. And all that's leading to disease. So there is a lot of biochemistry going underneath this, but nobody wants to see all that stuff. But there are papers after papers that will show just 2 things, how these 2 biofactors, inflammation and oxidative stress, are related, how they cause each other, and how they can create their own mini system. And you can see that the chronic inflammation and oxidative stress, the free radicals, they're damaging unto themselves, but then they're causing some of this other stuff. So we wonder why we have multi-symptom diseases. There's dozens of them. Almost all the autoimmune diseases are multi-symptom diseases. Gulf War syndrome is a good one. Chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, on and on and on, lupus. Where do all these come from? We never heard of these multi-symptom diseases until probably the 80s. They weren't around. The 90s, they started coming around. And what's happening is when you look at each one of these biofactors or biomarkers, each one of these causes different symptoms. Those diseases will have cognitive disorders. They'll have neurological impacts. They'll have memory issues. Well, all those things are happening from inflammation, oxidative stress, the free radical production, weak mitochondrial activity in the brain. So just those 3 things alone can explain, a lot of the neurological conditions. But let's talk about something even more powerful. Peroxynitrite punctures the blood-brain barrier. I mean, that's one of the things it does. It's in the science. The NIH guys, they're citing this. This is not science that's coming out of the blue. Read the NIH paper, their paper, nitric oxide and peroxynitrite in health and disease. It should win the Nobel Prize.
This is Packer's work, isn't it? Is that right?
Patrick, yeah. And
Patrick.
I talked to him, and he's a phenomenal guy. And the other scientists on there are phenomenal guys. They're just all three top, 100 scientists in the world. NIH is the gold standard of research. And they've really put a paper together that shows how peroxynitrite could easily be called, the smoking gun for chronic disease. And when I asked Palpatra that question, I said, if I wrote a paper that said, peroxynitrite is the root cause of the smoking gun of chronic disease, would that be hyperbole? And he said, absolutely not. And I'm saying, well, wait a second, that's what your paper basically says. But he was quiet. I said, because his paper is basically indicting peroxynitrite with more than 100 biological biochemical disruptions and more than 60 chronic diseases that we all have heard about. Not just the ones I found in my paper, but heart disease and almost all cancer and diabetes certainly, and lots of kidney disease and things like that. So we know, the scientific community knows the power of peroxynitrite. It's never actually, I can't find, the only person that's come close to creating a system here is Martin Pall. And Martin Pall, if you look at the colored guys, the ones that are, chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, and peroxynitrite, those four, he has lots of papers that talk about how those four interact. So he calls this vicious cycles. So I could take these four things and say, that's all you really need. These other things you don't have to have, but I just happened to, when I did my paper, I said, what's in common? So I figured they must have something to do with this. This ED is epithelial dysfunction or endothelial. That's the layers of skin and your blood-brain barrier, your lining of your stomach, your skin, things like that. And then the other one in here is AD, which is autonomic dysfunction up here. That's where your autonomic nervous system is getting triggered and doing things it shouldn't be doing. They play into that for sure. And then this thing NOx, which is nitrative stress, it is largely triggered by peroxynitrite, but other kinds of peroxy types of activities where nitrogen is the real problem, not oxygen. And that's one of the hardest things for people to understand. Wait a second, oxygen's good, right? Oxygen is actually a very toxic element in our body at a cellular level, especially these forms that are really radical. So your body needs it to, respiration and all that. We need oxygen, the cells need oxygen, but once it gets at a cellular level, things happen. And it can actually destroy some good stuff in our body too. Just even atmospheric oxygen is technically a free radical. The body's found ways to deal with it, but it hasn't found ways to deal with all its different aberrant offshoots like superoxide or hydroxyl or singlet oxygen or any of those other things that come. So those are other radicals that are actually a lot worse than the atmospheric oxygen. So don't stop breathing. We do need oxygen, but it is at the heart of a lot of our problems. NOx, I talked to a bunch of scientists about nitritive stress or nitrosolative stress. This, the key, scientists who are in the know have dealt with peroxynitrite. This is the worst. This is really bad stuff. It's not really a free radical. It's a reactive species, but it's not a reactive oxygen species. It's a reactive nitrogen species.
ROS, reactive oxygen species. You talked about the nitrogen stress, the NOx, as being, like you said, the worst and causing a whole barrage of diseases. But anyway, I'll let you carry on. It's just, the blood-brain barrier piece now explains a lot about brain fog when you're around the EMFs. And you also talked about autism as well, which was just incredible to, that piece that you talked about with Josh in that talk. I don't think I've heard anybody talk in that way. And I was going to mention that I know Dr. Andrew Wakefield. I went to school with him. So, I'd love him to see some of your work to just go, oh, right, here we are. And also Dietrich Klinghardt talking about electromagnetic fields, way he deals with autistic children and even older people by getting them to wear EMF underwear and T-shirts. and he gets great results when they do that, and switching off all the Wi-Fi and screening. Anyway, I'll let you talk. Sorry.
Yeah, and the idea on this autism idea is a good example of why we don't know about a lot of things. So why do we know so little about chronic disease? You go to a doctor, the 36 chronic diseases and conditions that I saw that we examined, which are the fastest growing, that we can find as the fastest growing for a 25-year period. No matter which one you have, you go to a doctor and a doctor will give you management tools for those. And this would be including everything from, anxiety, bipolar, depression, erectile dysfunction, Alzheimer's, autism, diabetes, lots of kidney issues is a big one. I think chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, on and on and on. So there's quite a few. Obesity and sleep are in there too. But really, you might argue on sleep, you might argue on obesity and sleep, but most of these are incurable. At a biological level, they're incurable. They're not. Can't take a pill to stop our sleep issues. We can't take a pill. We can manage our sleep issues. We can't take a pill to end our obesity. We can't take a pill to end fibromyalgia. But these are all systemic, and these diseases are complex. So until we look at these diseases as a system, and we forget about germs, because germs are no longer involved. We need to look at this, and scientists have done this, but the medical community hasn't done this very well. And that is, we need to look at these diseases as a system of things that are happening. And so autism is an interesting one, because does P factor cause autism? Probably not in and of itself. But let's just take a hypothesis here. And this is probably what you were talking about in that interview. Let's say we know that P factor is an outcome of environmental stress. We're surrounded by chemicals and energy, and we're eating pesticides. So it's not unusual that people would have high levels of P factor and peroxynitrites at the heart of that. And peroxynitrite, one of the chief things it does is it puts little holes in the blood-brain barrier. So the blood-brain barrier is set up so that nutrients and waste can cross, and some important sort of chemicals and molecules can get from one side to the other. But things that are damaging to the body, like heavy metals or toxins that float around in our bloodstream that go right through the blood, the brain cavity, can't really cross because they're too big, or they're not going to be accepted. So we're set up pretty well. So here's a hypothesis that people that are looking at these complex diseases where they can't understand, like, why is it that, they think about immunization. They think, these kids are getting immunized. Why are all these kids getting immunized, and some get autism and some don't? Like, why is that? And like, is it really, is it the heavy metals that are in the vaccination, or are they not? Are those a problem or not? So it's not easy to explain. So there's lots of arguments like, oh, well, most of the government agencies and states and federal will just say, hey, can't see any causal effect here. But let's put another factor in. And this is why diseases are so complex. One more variable. The variable is this. Let's say you've got 100 kids, and let's say, 30 of them have, they're exposed to all these sort of environmental toxins in a big way, like heavily. Cell phones. Their mom had their cell phone on their belly. They were talking on a cell phone while they were in vitro. They are exposed to chemicals in their environment. They're spraying the floors with bug spray. The kid is being pummeled with this stuff. You've got free radicals being created. You've got peroxynitrite being created. Peroxynitrite's going around, putting holes in the blood-brain barrier. So the 30 kids are highly exposed to environmental toxins or dietary toxins. Now those kids, they have a compromised blood-brain barrier. Let's just say they do. We don't know for sure because no one's doing empirical science on this. But let's say they do. Let's say the other 70 kids, maybe a little bit of problem, but not much. They're living pretty healthy lives. They don't have the same kind of exposures. Peroxynitrite's not running rampant. Their body's in balance or relative balance. So you test those kids, or now you give them all a vaccine. Okay, you give them all the same vaccine. The 70 kids who have an uncompromised, blood-brain barrier, nothing happens to them. They don't get autism. But out of the 30, 17 get autism. And trying to remember what the percentage is now. I think the percentage is nationally is around 1 in 67. So that's like 1.3%. But in Silicon Valley, it's said that 1 out of every 2 boys will have autism, I think, in the next 3 to 4 years. So like
that's in 3 to 4 years already in there.
That's I've read this. Now I'm not sure exactly what study they came from, but it's very high right now. I think it's 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 in Silicon Valley overall, but it'll be 1 in 2 boys very soon, and it might even be.
I heard it affects boys, and even the CDC said that it was. In their original papers that were in the movie Vaxxed, which Wakefield was the producer of, we cited exactly that.
Yeah. Okay, so that's where we're going. So in this particular population, we created 100 kids. 30 had a compromised blood-brain barrier. You've got certain substances in vaccines, and I don't know what substances exist now, but there have been heavy metals in vaccines in the past. Don't know why they're in there, but they've got toxic substances that you don't want to cross the blood-brain barrier. But in those 30 kids, they cross this in. It's able to cross in 17 in a meaningful way. Now, whenever you have toxins in the brain, you're going to have a lot of neuronal damage. So neurons, which you need to operate, the operating system of the brain is neurons, really. It's going to compromise the brain. Is it going to compromise development? Obviously. It's going to compromise execution and operation, yes. So some is irreparable damage, and that's why autism isn't totally reversible. Some is current, operational efficiency. So you could see some improvement with autism in certain kids. If you could just stop that, if you could heal the blood-brain barrier and you didn't give that, didn't do that immunization, would the kid have become had autism? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But if people don't investigate that, it's an obvious one. Scientists out there getting your PhD, here's the perfect empirical experiment to conduct, because you can solve the autism problem pretty easily if you look at multi-systems and the way they interact. This is obviously not just one thing. And that's when arguments are over, like, let's do an argument over cholesterol for a second.
Okay. Yeah.
I can't remember cholesterol numbers, but I know that like cholesterol, high cholesterol is associated with heart disease, I think 60% of the time, or 65% of the time, or something like that. Okay. Well, wait a second. Why isn't it associated 100% of the time? What are we missing here? Is it really cholesterol? Well, cholesterol is also associated with inflammation. And inflammation is associated with heart disease, like 95% of the time. So it's probably the inflammation, not the cholesterol. But I don't know for sure. But you got to be
That
careful.
has been cited as the case. It's the inflammation that is actually the cause of heart disease, not the cholesterol. That's a byproduct of it.
Yeah.
Learn about it.
So now we're telling everyone to lower your cholesterol. But cholesterol is like a really important component of testosterone, for one. No wonder everyone's getting low T these days. But many other really important. I mean, cholesterol can be a really good thing. Of course, there's good and bad cholesterol, and people argue about this forever. But usually, what's happening here is we're looking at the chain of causation, and we're taking one notch along the chain, and somebody's getting excited about, okay, cholesterol, it's largely responsible for heart disease, so we're gonna do big studies on it, or they're not looking at the blood-brain barrier damage and electrical fields or chemicals, how they might affect so these are multi-system. The chain of causation are many data points along the way, many transfers that have to happen. So we've got to be better in science, and we've got to be better in medicine and the physician community, and understanding that it's not just black and white. This is a very nuanced type of science, and that we're in a new era of disease. This is an era of chronic disease. This is a disease where most everything is being triggered by diet, lifestyle, and environment, and that we are no longer in the world of germs. And the big, some of the big things that I took out of my paper are, 4 new disease groups have exploded that no one's talking about. The neurological, we know about it, but we're not talking about it. Neurological, there's 91 million Americans affected by neurological disorders just in 2015. It's bigger now. There's about 209 million Americans that are affected by sort of autoinflammatory diseases that have an autoimmune component and inflammatory component. So now we are at 300 million already, right? Now we've got over 100 million people affected by sleep insufficiency, which is mainly caused by sleep issues like sleep apnea or insomnia or some other kind of thing. Some of it's self-imposed. Some people work 5 hours or sleep 5 hours a night just because they think they can do it, and maybe they can, but most can't. And then you've got obesity, which is 110 million. So 500 million Americans, wait a second, 500 million, we only have 326 million Americans. How do we get 500 million? Well, it turns out that just in those 4 disease categories, remember we didn't mention cancer here. We really didn't mention heart disease. We mentioned 4 categories that no one's talking about, but it's affecting 1.3 Americans. And that's, if we go to adults, it's worse than that. It's like almost 2, if it was just adults, it'd be like 2 conditions per person. So we've got a health epidemic happening, no one's talking about. We got 4 new disease groups that have exploded, and no one's talking about. People are still giving crazy amount of money to the Cancer Foundation and the Heart Disease Foundation, which is great. But guess what? The 36 diseases I found that were causing the most havoc in America today, that is causing like a $3 trillion problem. It was 2.7 trillion in 2015. It's now $3 trillion, okay? That number of 3 trillion is costing individuals and partially the US government. It is a huge annual cost, and yet heart disease and cancer taken together is only 300 billion. It's 1/10 of the big. So the elephant in the room is chronic disease. Look, we still need to give to the Cancer Foundation and the Heart Disease Foundation. But if we don't look at the chronic diseases that aren't being addressed, the autoinflammatory and the neurological, et cetera, we're missing a big opportunity. And this is why. The people that are giving to the Cancer Foundation and the Heart Disease Foundation, guess what? Peroxynitrite is actually connected to those 2 things too. And P factor is at the heart of those things. It's just that these other diseases are now growing faster, and these other diseases are more sensitive to the changes in our environment. So if you look at the historical perspective of disease, heart disease and cancer really started coming on in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and was sort of a latter 20th century phenomenon. Now, since 2000, only 3 or 4 cancers have grown more than 100%. And then heart disease has grown a little bit, but not much. So we've got a huge installed population of having those diseases. Doesn't mean we don't have a lot of it. Just means that they're not growing as much. But all these diseases are chronic. All of them are germless, whether you have cancers or heart disease or any of these 36 diseases I found. They're all connected in the same way. It's just that what I think we're going to find in the next 5 years is different environmental toxins trigger different kinds of diseases because of the kinds of free radicals and the kinds of and the intensity of peroxynitrite, its damage it causes. So that we're all these diseases are part of the same thing ultimately, but it was certain sorts of pesticides in the 60s, and it was certain sorts of new electrical exposures. And then all of a sudden in the 90s, it was a certain amount of sugar. Sugar came into the equation between 1970 and 1990. It was accelerating all these things. About 1990, we got wireless. That was new. We got Roundup Ready wheat corn and soy, that mid 90s, that came on new. We began to get different kinds of chemical exposures. There's lots of stuff that's being cycled in the environment that we never saw before. That happened in the 90s, and MBT, what is it, MBDT and the gasoline, I think it is, and we got rid of lead. That's good. So some of the things get calmed down, we lowered lead, but there's more of other chemicals. I think benzene's up a little bit, even though it's a controlled substance. So we're actually
and aluminum are being blatantly being
right
sprayed into our atmosphere. But,
right, aluminum, and then of course all the concentration of these things that have take a little bit while, and of course the radioactive stuff that's flying around. So we've our body's under assault. We're seeing different diseases grow, but they're probably all coming out of P factor, and they're all probably coming out with a free radical trigger that our body's going, I don't like what I'm seeing. I'm going to fight it. And as soon as we fight it, we release a little monster with a machine gun inside called, oxidative stressor free radicals. And that little monster with a machine gun starts shooting up everything. And guess what? It was just a shadow. They're shooting at shadows. And that's the irony, that man-made diseases are causing our bodies to be tricked into fighting something that doesn't exist, and it's friendly fire. The world is seeing a change in health because the best immune systems in the world are tearing themselves up better than anyone else. And so the most adapted human beings are getting the sickest.
That's certainly what we're seeing inside my clients, who were originally very healthy, and now they just, and my students were really healthy, and then, boy, they've gone the other way. Yeah. So, let me I'd rather see you than, they can listen to me talk all day, but
but that's what's going on. So I think that what we need to do is start seeing free radicals and environmental stress as the disease, maybe, and free radicals as the germs, right? And
okay,
it's really ironic. I'm in the gym working out, and I'm going from machine to machine. And so is everybody else. And everybody's sweating and has all sorts of germs all over their body. But everyone's taking paper towels and, rags and spraying it down with all these chemicals. Like, you go from machine to machine. And now you're holding all these machines with all this, antiseptic and, these chemicals. And I tell the guy before me, he said, I'll take the germs. Give me the germs. I don't really want the chemicals. And they kind of look at me funny. And I'm just going, because actually, I think germs are quite, this is just my own theory, but they actually, being exposed to germs is a good thing. I think your body's used to dealing with them, knows how to get rid of them. And, I do wonder about the vaccination question, I'm dating myself, but when I was a child, I got measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, croup, or whatever. I got all those things. And I haven't had a flu. I've had maybe one flu since 2000.
You and me together.
What are we worried about? You've got, your body is set up. If you've gotten all this disease, we didn't need immunization. I mean, I guess you can die from some of these diseases, and it's true. People want to prevent, death. But
when you look at the figures, measles, mumps, and rubella are very, very unlikely to die.
Yeah.
So small.
Yeah. So why are we going over? Let's just let people stay home from school and all that. And so, again, I'm not on a soapbox about having immunization or any of these things going on, but I'm wondering if we've weakened our immune systems by trying to overprotect it. And because, again, I go through every year, and a kid in the house that comes home and everyone's sick and exposed to all these, all this stuff. But why is it you and I aren't getting sick, and why is it that these kids are getting really sick 3 times a year now? And I'm talking about when they're in their teens, and why are other people who are heavily immunized getting sick all the time? It's an interesting question. There's probably other explanations, but I diverge.
I think a lot of it can be directly attributed to Wi-Fi in schools. I really think so, but that's another question. When you look at the reason why France actually took out Wi-Fi in schools, they said, well, we can see the writing on the wall, so to speak, and they saw that the disease rates were going up in these children, and they could directly link the two, so they just decided to take it out, Richard. They spent several $millions doing it, and they've already seen the effects. So
I'll do an advertisement for
Arthur.
For Arthur Furstenberg for those. I'll get off the screen share for a second. Let's see. Stop share. I don't know if you can see me, but this book, you've probably seen this one, The Invisible Rainbow.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, okay. This book, well-written book by Arthur Furstenberg, and he does a real good analysis and historical overview of electricity and electrical fields going way back to the 16th, 17th century. And so in the book, one of the things he makes, and he's done this in a paper as well, but he makes an interesting case. He shows how a sea change in electrical infrastructure always was concomitant with huge flu outbreaks.
Wow. And
he shows that he goes back to there's the flu in the late 1880s, and that's when telegraph was being propagated everywhere. And he shows how all these telegraph installations happened within this 1 or 2 year period, and suddenly there was major flus in the U.S. And then he shows around the 1917 flu, worldwide flu, how all sorts of radio systems were coming online. Not only telegraph, but there was all sorts of new technologies, which was wireless, basically radio frequencies being propagated everywhere, and they would come online. And he showed one after another these huge flu outbreaks. And then he had written a paper about when cell phones came out in New York, I think in around 1996, how or maybe it was in the 80s, I can't remember, when the first major cell phone installations were coming on, how each city would suddenly have these flu outbreaks. And it was sort of during the winter, but they'd have these, it would start in New York, and then would go to Chicago, and then there'd be one in Washington, D.C. And he did a paper on that. And everyone could say, well, well, that can't be true because there's actually germs, right? And, there are germs, and they identified the germ, and the flu is from this particular virus. And so how are you correlating all this wireless with it? But interestingly enough, remember, this idea of free radicals, right? Your free radicals, when they're released, your body gets flu-like responses, right? That's what it's doing. It's attacking. And so you get nausea, and you get sick, and you get temperature, and these are responses to a virus attack. So there's got to be some great science there to see, in the schools, when the germs are out there, okay, the kids have the germs in their body, they can identify them, and they're saying, okay, this is causing the flu. But like you say, what percentage of it was the virus, and what percentage of it was their wireless, sort of exposures? Because now you've got peroxynitrite being created by both factors. And so are you worsening the flu, or are you even causing the flu with all this extra stuff? So take all the wireless out, where they have not gotten the flu, but they have the bug in their body. Yeah, you can detect the bug, but it's not actually winning, or it's not actually causing the symptoms. So, I think Arthur Furstenberg is onto something there, and I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. What I predict is we're about to put 5G in space. And it
already is there. I know Dr. Lee Cowden, I was speaking to him. He said he's been sick. He's the head of the ACIM. When he flew to Phoenix, and his son even turned around and said they couldn't sleep at night, and then they by chance replaced their roof with a metal roof, and then the net result of that was they were able to sleep. And we know that those waves can't go through metal very easily. And I don't know, he was just saying he's had horrendous problems, whereas before that, several months before, he didn't have any problems. So what's changed? And he said, I think we've got 5G rolling around in space. I don't know. I know Elon Musk has put it up there. It's already there. And I don't know how many more satellites he's rolled out, but I know there's a couple of hundred probably up there already. And
Right.
they're due to put out 20,000. I don't know what the rest of the world is going to do, because will they allow it? I mean, this is just security gone mad.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Madness, anyway.
Cool. Well,
Have you got to get going? Because I appreciate you spent.
it's a changing world. I mean, I hope I helped a little bit. But those are just some of the things that I found.
I want you to talk about Green Wave, or can you point me, because you head that up, don't you?
Yeah, so I'm a co-founder at GreenWave. GreenWave creates dirty electricity filters and dirty electricity meters. It's power line EMI basically, and we are looking at the entire electrical environment as a whole. Dirty electricity happens to be really the easiest part of the electrical environment to fix or mitigate, because you can filter. It's just like water filter. You can, if you've got bad things coming in your water system, you can filter some of that out. And
and does it reduce your electricity bill? Because I know with say a smart meter, they'll add anything from 12 to 30% on top of your bill, which is, you and I both know that the smart meter is garbage. It was just brought out to make more money. It's the same way, the oil crisis really wasn't ever there. It was just a way for the oligarchs to make more money.
Yeah,
it's balmy, but let's not get into that whole political thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, smart meters do create dirty electricity, and they do create microwave radiation. So
Yeah,
they're negative in those two ways. Smart meters could be wired, in which case things could be, and they could put they could put technology within the smart meter, that capacitors, which would reduce dirty electricity. So smart meters don't have to be bad. I mean, they do they take a lot of private data. So from a data standpoint, you might feel privacy is being, being addressed, but from a health standpoint, they're not very healthy for a neighborhood, and they create a mesh network, which is very nasty, and it's very hard for your bodies to operate with all that pulsed radiation. So smart meters aren't a good thing, but they could wire them, and that would be the step, is to come back and turn off the radios, hook them to a wire, and use fiber optics to transmit the signal back to wherever they want to
that's what they're doing in France, by the way.
And where?
In France.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen the smart meters, and they're wired up to the telephone, and that's how they do it.
Yeah.
But so they're not emitting Wi-Fi. I don't know how often they're doing that, but that does cause another problem, because the waves that they're producing from the information is then being transmitted to the rest of the house wiring. But still, all the same, it's got to be better than the Wi-Fi radiation. Have you got any solutions for radio frequencies, non-ionizing microwave radiation? How does one get green wave, and where? Because I want to know more about that. Maybe that's another conversation, but I don't want to hold you up. But
no, absolutely. Well, I mean, greenwavefilters.com is where our website. So you could buy filters there, you could buy meters there, and you're going to, what I love about dirty electricity is that a good deal of the people actually see a result. Like 30% of our clients come back to us and say, "Wow." At minimum, they say they feel calmer. Many feel like, oh, my inflammation's down, or that I can sleep better, or the kids are calmer, or it's less anxiety. So it's not that we're creating something magic. What we're doing is we're reducing the amount of aberrant and chaotic electrical currents that are flowing through the air and they couple into your body. And so you could turn your Wi-Fi off and get some of the same benefits. And in fact, if you do both, you should get pretty good benefits. So we're not guaranteeing benefits, but when you put these in, it's going to decrease the amount of electrical chaos in your home or your building. And so yes, I'm involved with those. I'm on the board. I'm not an active operator, but I think that dirty electricity filtration is a good thing, and it's fairly easy, and it's really not expensive when you think about the health costs. What
is about $1,000 or something to put the thing in, or is it?
No, I mean, you could. The typical 3-bedroom house is probably $350, maybe $400 maximum.
That's nothing. really,
Yeah.
if you think about the overall scheme of things. I know
And
I spent about $1,000 putting sterilizers throughout the whole of the house.
yeah.
So 350, it would have been a lot cheaper. I didn't
Yeah.
know about green wave back
Well,
then.
you've got a big house probably, but
Well, 4 bedrooms, it's not that big, honestly, and we don't have really anything else. We don't have any lights, dimmer switches or anything. But those sterilizers are about 40 Canadian dollars each.
oh
So,
yes, you're Canada, of course. Yeah.
so I had to put 12 in. But and most houses like this size will take about between 12, 15, or even 20, depending on other things that they've got. We also switch off the electricity at night, which is amazing. And there's obviously some bad wiring in the house because there was one particular thing hooked up with the alarm system and the smoke detectors that was not good. And that was, I had a geovital meter measurement of the amount of electricity going to my body. And I have that video. And it just threw the device into a spin
Yeah.
on the bed. I mean, it wasn't even grounded or anything, and it was going mad. Switch off those things and nothing. So that's actually solved my back problem, which I've had for years. Go figure. So when you talk about dirty electricity, it's absolutely spot on there.
Yeah.
So that's and I wanted also to say I could probably answer why certain things land in certain areas of the body with relation to peroxynitrite and free radical and oxidative stress, and why does it attack, say, the heart or the gut or the brain? But it's then this ongoing chronic process, which I think is really interesting, whereby the body is continuously being challenged. But my work can absolutely categorically answer that question.
Nice.
From an embryonic point of view, and how the specific stressful events affect different embryonic layers in the body. So fascinating stuff. Maybe another conversation for another day when you have some more time. But yeah, we have the papers. Yeah. Anyway, there we go. Anything else you're involved with? Or you're not involved with Greenwave, but you just do all the research? What else do you do business wise? Or you just
yeah, I mean the research was sort of it was a side project. It wasn't, nobody asked me to do it. It was a curiosity more than anything. How I got that first paper was I just kept on seeing too many people were getting sick with too many diseases and issues that I never heard of, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and said something seems to be not right here. And is there something, like the big question at first was how big is this problem and how many people really are? Because there weren't any, I didn't see any studies or papers really quantifying what was going on. And the three big ones I saw, the first one I saw was sleep issues back in the late 90s. And suddenly everyone I was talking to was taking some sort of sleep medicine, Ambien or something, or the early 2000s. The late 90s, the first one I saw was depression. Everybody was taking Prozac. Suddenly I had a bunch of colleagues, everybody was taking Prozac. Now, it could be the Prozac people just getting to the doctors and the doctors just prescribing it. So I don't know which the chicken or the egg, but it seemed like there was more depression around us than I'd seen. And this was the late 90s. And the second thing was sleep in the early 2000s. And then I saw the ADD autism thing in the early 2000s too. And I was thinking, I was talking to a psychologist in Marin County, and she said, wow, I used to see in a typical classroom, 30 kids, I used to see maybe 2 kids on the spectrum, like autistic or ADD or something, they're having like a little trouble. She says, it was going up to 6. I said, well, that's triple. And she says, yeah, just in the last 10 years. And she said, that's what I'm seeing, and I thought, something's not right here. And I thought maybe it was where we lived, maybe there was something, some sort of, chemical, plant nearby or something. But then when I started looking at the broader U.S. stats, it's not just local; it's everywhere. And so that's what I originally did was I had a colleague and I said, let's go look and see what's growing fastest. And so we just made a huge list. I think 190 diseases that we knew about. We just went through like a rough thing. So let's just go through each one and just see what the trend in growth is. And that triggered all the other things, because once you find out how big it is, then you want to know why. Is there something in common? That was the next question, and that's when we started finding all these biological commonalities. And after the biological commonalities, and there are a lot more. There's a lot underneath the hood that needs to be brought forth. But once we saw that, then I was going, okay, that's the endogenous cause. That's what's inside the body. What's causing it? Is there an external cause? And then the external causes just presented themselves.
Yeah, I must admit that it changes everything in my field. Is there anything else that I can, do for you to share this information with other people? My colleagues, for example, at the ACIM, I think need to know what you're talking about, and just to make those connections. Or I don't know how you benefit.
There's no great benefit. I mean, I think the benefit is if we can have the conversation, and the big mystery to me, and this is what really just baffles me, is that this information's out there, and I've actually sent word to probably 30 or 40 Congress people with what I found, and I did send to President Obama when he was in office what I found, and a bunch of investigative reporting groups, the usual suspects, the biggest ones, right? And I sent this out, probably 60 or 80 emails with, hey, I found this, what do you know? Are you interested? Do you want to talk about this? Zero response. So I don't know, we live in a democracy where you think you have access. You think that you can make a difference, and I have about 5,700 reads on ResearchGate on the papers I've written. So somebody's reading it, and a lot of those are scientists, some are individuals. But why are no one wants to know? And my congressperson, I actually was at a town hall and told my congressperson what was happening, what I had found. And he said, it's fantastic you're doing this kind of work as a citizen. I love the entrepreneurial spirit. We need more people that goes out reaching out. And then, by the way, the lady in the back that wanted to talk about fracking, what was your question again? My congressperson, I was basically saying, you've got a $2.7 trillion problem here that you might be able to fix. What is think in dollars for a second, what would that mean to the country? We've got a trillion dollar debt. What if we could knock off a trillion of that a year? We could dig ourselves out of debt. And yet this congressperson, who's now governor of Colorado, didn't want to investigate, didn't want to hear. He didn't say, hey, talk to me later, give me a paper. What is it why are the people in the media and politics, why are we so resistant to hearing this truth? And why hasn't the CDC done this paper?
Well, I know what I can do is I can draw attention to various people to your work, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
And other communities around the world, because I have a big following in Australia and Europe, as well as over here, and I just really like to get this information out there. And it's very strange because I'll say it to one person that will just go to another and then to another, and then before you know it, it's hit somewhere that you don't expect it to. But we'll just see which way it goes. Because I think that this changes everything, as I said, and my students and other people. Especially when I started talking about it and realized what you were talking about, it's changed my life in the sense that I realized that we're going to look after our mitochondria. We've got to sugar is absolutely horrendous for us. I know that anyway, but the mitigation of your radio frequencies in your life around the place. You just can't sit there and just go, oh, we don't really need to we only need to switch off the Wi-Fi at night. I'm sorry, you got to do way more than that. Because this is seriously challenging stuff, and we can't carry on in this way if we want to remain human and remain well and have a long life, you know, you've got to, you've nailed it. Just 90. Your original comment at the start was 90% of all the diseases that we're experiencing right now are caused by this. So just mitigate those things, and then you know, deal with the odd occasional illness that you might get from a bacterial, fungal, you know, mold is a big one, because mold just grows like crazy around RF anyway. And then you're okay. You know, you really can get yourself back to where you need to, where you can wake up. So, you know, amazing work. And I hopefully you recognize my personal understanding of what you've done, and I'm going to share that with other people, and they'll just share it. So we'll see which way it goes.
Well, great to talk to you, Richard. Appreciate it. And when I talk more, let's stay in touch.
Yeah.
I want to hear more about your work, and thank you, and we'll talk soon.
Speak soon. Thank you so much, Richard. Bye-bye for now.